In the year 1692, the small and quiet colonial village of Salem, Massachusetts, descended into what has been described as a paranoid madness, writing a dark and bloody chapter in American history. We know the grim statistics here, that 19 innocent people were hanged for the impossible crime of witchcraft. One man, an elderly man named Giles Corey, was even pressed to death with heavy stones simply for refusing to stand trial, and at least 5 more men and women perished in the squalor of disease-ridden jails. In this atmosphere of terror, just to speak out against the trials, to even question the proceedings, was to risk being accused yourself. The names of those who drove the hysteria are infamous. The dogmatic judges, the fire and brimstone ministers, and the so-called afflicted girls whose spectral visions sent their neighbors to the gallows. But what history often forgets is the story of the Dissenters, specifically the dynasty that dared to fight back. This was not a family of rebels or firebrands, but one of immense wealth and intellectual influence who, from behind the scenes, armed themselves not with superstition, but with logic, evidence, and reason. They were a colonial powerhouse with deep connections to the intellectual heart of the colony itself, Harvard College, and even the prestigious Royal Society in London, which was the leading scientific body in the world at the time. This is the untold story of the Brattle family and the secret letter that helped dismantle America's most notorious witch hunt from the inside out. It's a story that proves that even in the darkest of times, when an entire society seems to lose its mind, the courage to think for yourself can be the most powerful weapon of all. We will discuss this and more today on Trace Your New England Roots. Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Trace Your New England Roots. I hope you all enjoyed your Thanksgiving holiday. To truly understand the extraordinary courage of the Brattle family, you have to transport yourself back in time and picture the world they inhabited. The Massachusetts Bay Colony in the late 17th century was a place simmering with deep, pervasive anxiety. Life was unyieldingly hard. Winters were brutal, they were long, and a failed crop could mean starvation. The vast unknown wilderness that pressed in on all sides of this small, huddled settlement and the surrounding towns was seen as the literal territory of the devil. For the Puritans who governed this society, every event was a message from God, a concept that they called providence. They looked for divine signs in every storm, every illness, and every misfortune. Their worldview was a constant search for meaning in a chaotic and often frightening landscape. But where they saw God, they also saw his opposite. They saw Satan. They believed the devil was not a metaphor, but a literal active force in the world that was hell-bent on corrupting their city on a hill and destroying their holy experiment. This underlying fear was cranked up to a fever pitch by political chaos. The colony had recently lost its royal charter, leaving it in a state of legal limbo without a stable, legitimate government. And this instability was compounded by the constant humming dread of brutal frontier wars with Native American tribes. These conflicts, the colonists often framed as a holy war against the agents of Satan. This was the powder keg, and the spark was finally lit in Salem Village and other nearby towns, in small, bickering farming communities known for their internal squabbles. Now, early in 1692, the local minister's daughter and his niece began to exhibit terrifying and inexplicable fits. They contorted their bodies, screamed in agony, and when the bewildered adults in the room pressed them for the cause, they claimed they were being tormented by witches. Their accusations, starting with a few marginalized women on the fringes of society, ignited a fire of hysteria that soon engulfed the entire colony. The legal system that emerged to handle the crisis was a disaster waiting to happen. It was a special court, and the court of Oyer and Terminer was hastily established to hear and determine the cases. And the judges, most of whom were devout Puritans with extensive political experience, but had zero legal training. And this made for them a fateful decision. They chose to allow a form of evidence that was both terrifying and utterly impossible to disprove. And this was spectral evidence. This was the testimony of the afflicted girls who claimed that the specter or a spirit of an accused person was physically attacking them, biting, pinching, and choking them, and that only they could see their ghostly tormentor. Think about the legal nightmare this created. How could you possibly prove your spirit wasn't off attacking someone while your physical body was miles away? You couldn't. And this practice created a legal labyrinth where the accused were guilty until proven innocent. Because of this, respected, pious members of the community, like the elderly and devout Rebecca Nurse, were sent to the gallows based solely on the invisible, unprovable visions of a handful of teenage girls. It was a world that was turned upside down, where logic was hearsay and hysteria had become law. And in this world, to even question the trials, to doubt the word of the afflicted, was to risk being branded a devil worshiper yourself. And this was the terrifying reality that one of Boston's most powerful and rational families decided to challenge. And long before the madness in Salem erupted, one of Boston's most prominent families was quietly building an empire, not just of money, but also of ideas. The architect of this dynasty was Captain Thomas Brattle, who was an English immigrant who arrived in the mid-17th century, and he rapidly became a titan of colonial commerce and civic life. Now, Captain Brattle was a master of the complex and risky world of transatlantic trade, and his ships were a constant presence on the ocean, forging vital economic links between Boston, the resource-rich West Indies, and the markets of Europe. He amassed such a vast fortune that when he died in 1683, his estate was believed to be the largest in all of New England. This wealth bought him immense influence, not just in the merchant houses of Boston, but also in the political and military affairs of the colony. He had served as a commissioner negotiating with Native American tribes, and he held a captaincy in the local militia. But Captain Brattle's most enduring legacy was his investment in the colony's intellectual future. He was one of the founders of Boston's influential Old South Church, and he crucially served for over a decade as the treasurer of Harvard College. And in this role, he was far more than just a bookkeeper. He was the steward of Harvard's financial survival, which this cemented his family's position as patrons of education and rational inquiry in a world that was often dominated by rigid dogma. And Captain Brattle died nearly a decade before the witch trials actually began. He never witnessed the hysteria that would consume the colony that his generation had built, but he left behind more than just his fortune. He passed on a legacy of intellectual curiosity and a dynasty that was built on the foundations of reason. He ensured that his children, especially his sons William and Thomas Jr., had received the finest education possible, both graduating from Harvard themselves. And this combination of inherited wealth and elite education gave them the financial freedom and the intellectual confidence to think for themselves. His namesake, his son, Thomas Brattle Jr., born in 1658, inherited both his father's vast wealth and his intellectual fire. He was a brilliant mathematician, he was an astronomer, and he traveled and studied abroad. And most importantly, he was recognized as a member of the Royal Society in London, the most prestigious scientific institution in the world, home to towering figures like Robert Boyle and as well as Sir Isaac Newton. This connection placed him in a completely different intellectual universe from the superstitious insular mindset that was gripping Salem at the time. His worldview was one of empirical observation and verifiable facts, not spectral visions. It was this unique inheritance, the wealth that made him untouchable, the Harvard education that sharpened his mind, and a worldview that prized evidence over superstition. And this perfectly positioned him to challenge the madness his father had built the shield, and he would soon be forced to wield it. Now, if you're finding this deep dive into our collective past valuable, please take a moment to click the like and subscribe buttons. And if you see it, give this video a hype. It's a small free action by you that truly helps the channel and grow, and it signals to the YouTube algorithm that you're enjoying this content. It will then recommend the video to other budding family historians and genealogists just like you who are seeking similar content. And please be sure to participate in the comments below. I truly value the engagement and community that I have with my viewers. And I honestly, I do try to read and respond to every comment. It lets me know how I'm doing. Sometimes it gives me recommendations for new content, which this video sprang from. And it lets me know what you are interested in seeing. And it gives me feedback. And of course, I'll always try to answer any questions that you may have. I'm also excited to announce another way that you can support my channel. In addition to subscribing, you can now become a member by clicking on the join button. Membership will give you access to member exclusive content. I may make early access to videos make it available to members before they're released to the public, and as well as other topics. And also consider joining my Patreon. This support helps me tremendously with the logistics of maintaining this channel and keeping current with new technologies and methodologies to bring you the best content I can, and always with a mindset to improve quality. Your support means the world to me. It helps me create more in-depth genealogy guides. It helps me to explore fascinating colonial stories such as this, and it enables me to connect with you through personalized content. Together, we'll uncover the rich legacies of our ancestors, learn practical research strategies, and celebrate the incredible journeys that have shaped your family histories. And I also want to thank you for helping this channel to reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers in a short amount of time. I'm truly humbled by your support. Please consider helping us to reach our next goal of 5,000 subscribers. Thank you for becoming a vital part of this journey. Let's dive in to the past and bring our roots to life. Now let's jump back into the story. By the sweltering summer of 1692, the Salem witch hunt was spiraling into a full-blown contagion of fear. The trials, presided over by the zealous and unyielding Lieutenant Governor William Stoughton, were a spectacle of raw, chaotic emotion. The afflicted girls, these teenage girls, had become grim celebrities. The moment an accused person was led into the courtroom, the girls would collapse into horrifying fits, writhing and screaming that the defendant's invisible specter was biting, pinching, and even choking them. The court, against all established legal tradition, treated this invisible torment as stone cold fact. The first hanging was that of Bridget Bishop on June 10th, and her death did not quench the hysteria. In fact, it validated it. To many, it was proof that the court's methods were working, and the accusations then multiplied, spreading like a virus. The list of the accused soon grew to include respected church-going citizens Rebecca Nurse, who was a 71-year-old grandmother who was renowned for her piety, was initially found not guilty by the jury, but the crowd in the courtroom roared in furious protest, and the magistrates, bowing to the pressure, sent the jury back to reconsider their verdict. And they returned with a guilty verdict. She was hanged on July 19th. And perhaps the most shocking victim was Reverend George Burroughs, a Harvard-educated man and a former minister of Salem Village itself. And the accusers made the stunning claim that this man of God was secretly the ringleader of the witches. And on August 19th, standing on the gallows with a rope around his neck, he recited the Lord's Prayer from start to finish without a single error. This was something a witch was widely believed to be incapable of doing. The crowd then grew uneasy, murmuring that an innocent man was about to be killed. But from the audience, the influential Boston minister Cotton Mather shouted down the dissent, reminding the crowd that Burroughs was not an ordained minister and that the devil himself could appear as an angel of light to deceive the faithful. The execution went forward. With each and every death, the court grew more emboldened, and the accusers became more powerful. The only escape from the gallows, it seemed, was to confess. Under intense pressure, including methods that were effectively torture, dozens confessed to practicing witchcraft. These coerced confessions then created a vicious, self-feeding cycle of terror, surviving as proof that a vast satanic conspiracy was indeed underway. Now, for a man like Thomas Brattle Jr., observing this catastrophe from the relative sanity of Boston, this was a grotesque assault on reason itself. As a man of science and logic, he watched as judges just accepted this evidence that would be laughed out of any rational court in the world today. He saw people that he knew, even members of his own church in Boston, getting swept up in the expanding dragnet of accusations, and the madness was creeping closer and closer and closer to the centers of power. To remain silent was to be complicit, and the time for quiet observation was over. And on October 8th, 1692, with the jails overflowing and the gallows having already claimed 19 lives, the wealthy and rational Thomas Brattle Jr. sat down to write what he produced was not a public manifesto, but it was an act that would have been suicidal. But he carefully, meticulously argued in this letter addressed to an unnamed clergyman. And this document, known simply today as the Letter of Thomas Brattle, was designed to be circulated secretly among the colony's educated elite. These were the ministers, the merchants, and politicians who might influence to stop this madness. It was a devastating, logical takedown of this entire affair. Brattle's letter is a masterclass in argumentation. He strategically chose not to waste time debating the existence of witches and demons, but instead he attacked the process of the trials themselves, exposing their foundation as rotten. His first and most powerful target was spectral evidence. He brilliantly flipped the court's own logic on its head. If Satan is this great deceiver, he argued, why wouldn't he frame the most godly people to sow chaos and division? And by accepting the visions of these afflicted girls, the court was essentially taking the devil's word over that of a respected, God-fearing community member. And with biting sarcasm, he wrote that when the rest of the world heard about this, they would laugh at the demonstration and conclude that the said Salem gentleman was possessed, and at least with ignorance, was full of their own folly. Next, he dismantled the confessions. He pointed out the painfully obvious fact that people were only confessing to save their own lives from the gallows. They were out to save their own necks. And he described how suspects were being driven to confess through rude and barbarous methods. A clear reference to what he correctly identified as pure, unadulterated torture. He then called out the blatant hypocrisy and class prejudice of the proceedings. In a bold and dangerous move, he very pointedly asked why is it that some prominent individuals who had been accused were never arrested or prosecuted. He specifically named Mrs. Margaret Thatcher, the mother-in-law of one of the magistrates, and who was named Jonathan Corwin. This double standard, he wrote, was a very great scandal and stumbling block to many good people. It was a direct accusation of corruption aimed squarely at the men themselves who were running the trials. And finally, Brattle appealed to a core principle that would resonate deeply with his elite audience: English liberty. If the devil will be heard against us and his testimony taken, he wrote, our liberty vanishes. He was arguing that if the word of a demon or those claiming to see one was enough to strip a person of their life and property, then no one in the colony was truly free. Brattle signed the letter only with the initials TB, but in the small, interconnected world of Boston's elite, there could have been little doubt as to who was the author. The letter was a profound act of intellectual courage. It was a candle of reason that was lit in the middle of a hurricane of terror. It armed other skeptics with the logical arguments that they desperately needed, and it arrived at the perfect moment. The governor of the colony, William Phipps, he was beginning to have his own serious doubts, and Brattle's systematic critique may have been the final push he needed to act. Tom Brattle's letter, circulating quietly but quickly through the halls of power in the autumn of 1692, landed like a logical bombshell. It didn't end the hysteria overnight, but it did mark a critical turning point. It provided intellectual and moral cover for other powerful critics, most notably the influential minister Increase Mather, whose own subsequent writings against the use of spectral evidence echoed many of Brattle's powerful arguments. The tide of elite opinion was finally turning. The true tipping point, however, came when the accusers they fatally overreached. And in their terrifying arrogance, rumors began to swirl that they had named increasingly prominent people. They were becoming braver with whom they were accusing, including, it was alleged, the wife of Governor William Phips himself. Suddenly, the threat was no longer confined to some rural village. It was knocking on the door of the highest authority in the colony. And whether it was the persuasive logic of men like Brattle or the personal threat to his own family, Governor Phips finally acted decisively. And on October 29th, 1692, just 3 weeks after Brattle composed his letter, Phips ordered a halt to the proceedings of the Court of Oyer and Terminer. He dissolved the very court that had sent 19 people to their deaths. He then established a new superior court and in a landmark decision forbade it from accepting spectral evidence. Now, the results were immediate and dramatic. When trials resumed early in 1693, this new court, stripped of its most powerful and prejudicial weapon, struggled to convict anyone, and the vast majority of the remaining accused were acquitted. And by May, Governor Phips issued a general pardon, freeing everyone who were still languishing in jail under the charge of witchcraft. The great Salem witch hunt was officially over. And in the years that followed, Massachusetts began a slow and painful public reckoning. One of the judges, Samuel Sewell, stood in silent shame in Boston's Old South Church as his formal public apology for his role in the tragedy was read aloud. The colony eventually declared the trials were unlawful and offered financial compensation to the victims and their families. The Brattle dynasty, it only grew in stature. Thomas Brattle Jr. continued to serve with distinction as the treasurer of Harvard for 20 years, for 2 decades. He and his brother William went on to found the Brattle Street Church in Boston in 1699. It was a deliberately liberal institution, a liberal institution that broke from the rigid Puritan orthodoxy that had underpinned the witch hunt, attracting enlightened figures like John Hancock and even the Adams family. The family's legacy was one of leadership, civic duty, and a quiet but unshakable belief in reason over fanaticism. Captain Thomas Brattle built an empire that gave his son the security and intellectual tools to stand against the tide. Thomas Brattle Jr., he then used that platform to defend logic and justice in the colony's darkest hour. He said that I am afraid that ages will not wear off that reproach and those stains which these things will leave behind them upon our land. He was right, but his own quiet courage stands as an equally enduring legacy. It's a powerful reminder that a single, seasoned, reasoned voice can be enough to guide a society back from the brink. This story of the Salem Witch Trials is usually told as a straightforward horror story. It's a cautionary tale of superstition that had run amok. We rightfully remember the villains who drove the prosecution and the victims who suffered so unjustly. But in the shadows of that dark history lies a more complex and hopeful story. The story of the Dissenters. The Brattle dynasty represents the hidden counter-narrative to the Salem hysteria. Captain Thomas Brattle built the foundation of wealth, education, and intellectual curiosity. And it was his inheritance that he gave his son, Thomas Brattle Jr., which became the tools, the platform, and the courage to become a voice of reason when madness had seized control. His secret letter, a brilliant and methodical critique of the trial's legal and logical failures, struck a pivotal blow against the fanatical machine that had already claimed so many innocent lives. Their story is a powerful lesson that transcends its time. Mass hysteria is not merely a relic of the 17th century. In any era, fear, social division, and the abandonment of critical thinking can lead societies down a dark and destructive path. But the story of the Brattles also shows the principles that they championed: logic, reason, the demand for evidence, and the courage to question authority. These are the timeless defenses that we have against the darkness. Those principles are as vital for us today as they were in the fall of 1692. Thanks for watching. This again is Eric from Trace Your New England Roots, where history starts with your family.